Hey there, this is Luke, and as we mentioned, this month we are bringing you a little bit of a different style of podcast in that we are looking back at some of our best episodes since we launched the podcast, and for this one, we're going all the way back to episode 2 with Jeremy Lenentine. Now, we've featured Jeremy a few times on the podcast, but in this episode particularly, we have a conversation about how you can prepare and market for big days. You know, as churches head into the fall, a lot of them have some bigger outreach opportunities on the calendar, and definitely as we get towards the end of the year and we get into Christmas, there are some big marketing opportunities to reach your community and see new people at your church. And so Jeremy has some great insight on that during this conversation. So enjoy this replay of episode 2 from the Must Increase podcast.
Do you want your church to have a good reputation amongst people, that they speak well of you and things like that? They would say yes. Then I'd say, okay, you need a good marketing. You need a good marketing campaign.
Welcome to the Must Increase podcast, where our mission is to increase His name through your church. I am your host, Luke Clayton, and I'm joined by my co-host, Mr. Bo Snyder. Bo, how's it going?
Luke, it's going well. Let's get into the podcast. We're talking to Jeremy today with the Gospel Light Baptist Church in Rio Rancho, New Mexico. We were out there back in August.
Yeah.
Back in August.
We've actually been out there twice in 2018.
We have, yeah, two times in 2018, which seems like a long time ago, but it just happened just a few months ago.
Yeah, we were, both cases were shooting short films. So in March, we were there to shoot It Is Finished. And then in August, we were there shooting Nativity, which we've recently released to our YouTube channel. And then also Resurrection, which is coming out Easter of this year.
Right. So Jeremy is on staff there at Gospel Light Baptist Church. Tell us what he does. What's his role?
Jeremy, his official title is the outreach pastor. And so he's responsible for outreach. But they're a mid-sized church, so really a lot falls under his...
Sure, he wears many hats.
Yeah, his umbrella of responsibility, if you will. So one of the things... obviously with outreach is marketing. And, you know, we hear the term marketing and we often think of that as just a business term, like that doesn't apply to churches, but the truth is it does. Marketing is simply the management of perception. So Jeremy has learned very well to manage the perception of his church in his community of Rio Rancho, New Mexico, which is a suburb of Albuquerque.
Right.
And so anyways, today's conversation, we focus on that idea of what he does for outreach and marketing for specifically a lot of his bigger days. So like Easter or a Christmas Sunday or a special outreach event. Right.
When their days are high attendance, those are more high profile Sundays throughout the year.
Yeah, that are more. Every Sunday is geared to the community, but these are above and beyond.
Right.
And they put a little extra on their outreach efforts to get people in. And so, and speaking of which, one of the things that we consulted with Jeremy on was developing our 2019 church marketing strategy guide. And this is, we took some of his ideas that he mentions in this podcast and applied it to this when we were developing this. And this is actually a free resource that you can download at our website, mustincrease.com. You can head over, download it. It's completely free. And what it'll do, hey, we're only a few days into 2019. It's not too late to start developing a strategy. You can have a nice website. You can have pretty graphics. And you can have nice videos, all that stuff. All that stuff is great. But without a plan, you will not make a lot of progress this year when it comes to outreach and marketing. So head over to mustincrease.com and grab that. You'll be glad you did, and you'll see results as a result of using this strategy guide. Now, anyways, going back to Jeremy, just want to give that plug there because that's a free resource. But with Jeremy, he's really got a great process and a great system, but I don't want to give it away. So really, without any more discussing it, let's just get right into the interview with Jeremy Lenentine of Gospel Light Baptist Church. When we think about outreach in church, to me, that's always kind of been like a church-friendly word for marketing in a way. Now, of course, there's much more to it. You know, with church, it's not just, marketing as far as to make money, it's to reach people. And so, obviously, I'm not trying to make it so, like I said, I'm not trying to belittle that fact of the people aspect of it. But when it comes down to it, I mean, you're trying to manage the perception of your church to people, to reach them, to get them to come to your church. Am I kind of right in that?
Yeah, so I think that we do this weird thing where all of a sudden when we start talking about church stuff, then like principles or business principles or marketing principles somehow don't apply. So, but I would ask that same person, well, do you want your church to look favorable in the community? And no doubt they would say yes. I would say, okay, do you want your church to have a good reputation amongst people, that they speak well of you and things like that? They would say yes. Then I'd say, okay, then you need a good marketing. You need a good marketing campaign. Yeah. And that should be something that is important. And so I think that sometimes that we want what it brings, but we're scared to actually just, I guess, say the word marketing or whatever else. But anytime you go out into the community, albeit with the gospel or just inviting or maybe just doing a community reach day, you're building your, I'll say the word brand. What I mean is just you're building your reputation in the community, and any church needs a good reputation in the community, especially the more tight-knit your community is. So it's important. Yeah,
and absolutely. Now, you mentioned that word brand too. I think a lot of churches kind of believe they're exempt from, like you said, these principles of branding and marketing, and just general good communication. And how many church websites have you gone to, and they just look bad? Yeah. I mean, they just look like they were built in the 90s, and they haven't been updated, and they're still talking about their 2007 picnic, and then they've got their logo is not good. And I think one of the things that I've seen a lot of beyond just, like I said, websites and stuff is inconsistent branding. They don't use the same logo, or they don't have a logo at all, or something like that. And so with that, we can talk about I want to talk about the media aspect of it. What are some things you do using media, things such as, obviously, I don't want to give it all away. I want to give you some time to answer, but without saying everything that you use. But, things like outreach materials, whether it be printed or banners or video or anything like that. How do you guys use that to market and reach your community?
Yeah, so I'll say two things. If we can come back to the logo later on, because we went through a rebranding ourselves about 5 years ago that we found really important, because the same thing. We sort of had a carryover of two logos, one of them being very bad and the other one not being fully integrated. And it's not as hard as most people would think, but it is important. It's very, very important. I mean, if you can imagine if you walked into a Walmart and they had 2 or 3 different logos going on just because they were slow in changing things out, it'd be ridiculous. And I think another misconception when I start talking about this stuff is that smaller churches might tell themselves, well, we don't have the budget to do those kind of things. This is going to be something that we get to one day. And I would say that you might not have the budget to do it on a scale that you want to, but any church at any size can look sharp. There's church plants these days that, man, they are rolling out with some great media, and it's tools, it's cheap subscriptions that they have, it's small tools that they have. It doesn't cost them much money, but they brand really, really well. I was sitting down with a pastor just a couple of weeks ago at a youth conference we had here, and he had just launched about 9 months ago. And I'll tell you, their stuff is sharp, and he did it all on a budget, did it on an easy budget, but he knew what he was going after, and he stayed with his brand. So to answer your question about materials, about 4 years ago, we sat down and decided that we were going to identify for us what would be 5 big days, if you want to call it, days where we go all out, we're all in. And once we identified those big days, which for us, one included Easter, one included Christmas, and I think it's important and wise, this is a whole other issue, but it's really important and wise to use the natural times where people are already have church on their mind. And in our industry, that's just Easter and Christmas. That's pretty much it, unfortunately, where society thinks about things of Jesus or things of God naturally. So using those 2 days is huge. And so when we did that, we sat down and we said, okay, these are our 5 big days. Then we need to fully craft a big day outreach plan. And when we did that, what that meant was they would be all days that we would order in flyers and materials for. They would all be days in which we ran Facebook campaigns for. They would all be days which had very specific big outreach times where we tried to get a lot of people going out just to pass out flyers, maybe just inviting if they weren't comfortable with doing anything else, just to invite, put an invite in people's hands. And then also that they had very clear and defined follow-up plans, so that on the backside that we were getting people's information and then following up with them, welcoming them to our church, to our community, and trying to make them a part of our church. And I think once we did that, it was really, really great to be able to say, okay, these are the 5 times we go all in, and we know what that means. Anytime a big day comes up like that, we're ordering the materials, 6 weeks out that we need, because you have about a month where you can push really hard to invite people. If you haven't already started to set your calendar, pastor, just look at what are your big days. Maybe you can only have 3 big days in a year, 4 big days in a year, but they should be specific times where you have a definite plan for how you run leading up to that day, in that day, and then on the other side of that day as well for the best follow-up possible.
We're going to come right back to the rest of our conversation here in just a bit, but I wanted to take a moment to let you know about a new resource we are excited to release for churches, and that is our free fall media bundle. Believe it or not, the fall outreach season is all but here, and this is a big opportunity for your church to reach out to your community. A lot of people use the fall, kind of the beginning of school year for a lot of people with colleges and even high school and elementary students, and even for parents. It's almost a reset time of the year, and so a lot of people will be looking for churches, looking for a church home, and so you have the potential to have a lot of new people in your church during the fall season, and that's why we made the fall media bundle. And like I said, you can get yours for free. It includes screen graphics, social media graphics, and we have a lot more options as well. Outreach materials, bulletin covers for your church, all kinds of stuff that you can get as part of this fall media bundle. So be sure to head over to fallmediabundle.com to get yours. That's fallmediabundle.com. Head over there and download your free fall media bundle today. Have you used anything as far as with every door direct mail or mailers or anything of that nature? Because I get from some that it's effective and some they tell me it's not effective. So I kind of get your take on that.
Yeah, so the problem with direct mailers like that is you can't always tell if it's effective. There's not a great way, and I've talked to a lot of different guys that do the job that I do, and there's not a great way to quantify it. One thing that we started doing that I borrowed this idea is, and I think it's effective, is when you're leading up to a big day, probably, let's say 5 weeks out or so, they would direct mail that invitation for that day to a certain zip code, right, or a certain section or whatever. And then they'll follow up a week or two later, and they'll go and they'll try to blitz through and knock through that area or whatever. And it allows you to open up with, hey, you might have got something in the mail from us, just wanted to follow up with that. And then maybe it opens a door, it kind of cracks the door open a little bit, Maybe if your connection card has a place on there, your visitor card, where they can mark how they heard about you, maybe they hear about you through indirect flyer or whatever. I think that it's good to do. I think there's some things that you can throw so much money at that nothing will really ever beat just getting out there and personally inviting people. Whether it's somebody you already know, like a coworker, okay, or a friend or family, that's great. But this, after you've been in church for 5 to 10 years, you pretty much run out of people. All of your friends are inside the church now, so at some point you're going to have to go to meet people that you aren't familiar with, people that are strangers to you. So I think that it opens a door. I would say have a plan about it and just hold to that plan. You could spend a lot of money, blitzing thousands of houses, and you might not have that in the budget. And so it's something that I think you should do, but you shouldn't do a whole lot. Another thing with Facebook posts, we used to pay to bump and promote a lot of Facebook posts, and again, that's almost impossible to tell if anyone comes from that. Yeah. But I think what's more effective is we just taught our people organically to like, comment, and share whatever we put out from our church. And that gets it on a lot more friendly eyes. You don't look at ads when they come up on your Facebook. You don't. You scroll right past them. So I think that throwing a lot of money at that, again, is sort of foolish. But getting your people involved in that way is another way that they can be sharing it just Tuesday morning when they're at work. They can help you promote your day that's coming up if you have a good social media presence.
Yeah, and that just that concept of really what you're talking about is using social media with the power of word of mouth.
Absolutely.
In a way, you're posting to people that are like those people.
Right.
And if those people like your church, there's a better chance that they're going to like your church. The other thing is, like I said, it's the word of mouth concept of, hey, my friend said good things about this church and shared posts about this church. And that really, I think that just goes way further than just paying and getting an ad on the news feed of somebody random that you've never met. Not to say that couldn't be effective, but the whole concept of the true social networking and people sharing and liking and kind of networking that way is much more powerful. And I did want to say this, jumping back to our thing about mailers. That is something that you mentioned, the cost. And if you are going to do direct mail or something, I know people where I've tried to work with churches trying to do these mailers, and they're trying to put too much on it, or really they're making it to where, think about all the junk mail you get in the mailbox, and if it doesn't stand out from that junk mail, it's going in the trash. At least that's how it works at my house.
Yeah.
And so you're going to have to, if you're going to invest that money, you need to also consider investing into making sure the design of that mailer looks sharp, that it's going to stand apart. And be strategic in that. Like I said, there's different ways to do direct mail, whether it be zip codes or by the specific mail routes or whatever, but you have to be strategic in that. And I did want to, because like you said, you mentioned that about the mailers. And so with whatever Facebook, and one more thing I did want to say here that, I think about your church and some other churches I work with. Your church is excellent about the personal invitation aspect. In that, whether it's, we talk about social media, but taking that to a personal level where they actually go to their friends, their coworkers, and even go to their neighbors and in their community, and they actually invite people to church and tell them about essentially what their church is and what it's all about, and that's Jesus Christ. And I did a statistic study on a church I worked with on that used just about every form of advertisement you can think of: mailers, Facebook, newspaper ads, everything. And of course they had some other flyers and stuff, posters, things like that. It was amazing when we actually were able to capture the numbers on this and get a pretty good idea. It's well over 80% of people who still came not because they saw an ad, not because they saw something on Facebook or a mailer, because someone invited them.
Yeah. Because
the power of a person actually inviting them, and it's just so much more than just seeing an ad in print or on Facebook or however it may be. And I think that's why your church, it's been here 30 years, and really grown from nothing to Sundays you'll have anywhere from 300, 400 plus, depending on the time. 400, depending on the time of year. So, how have you kind of cultivated that, created that culture of, getting that whole, hey, spread the word? Because I know a lot of churches don't. They don't get people excited about going and sharing about their faith or about their church. So how have you kind of cultivated that these past years?
Yeah, and just say this. I think that people assume it can be like one way or the other. Do I believe in using Facebook as a tool? Absolutely. Do I believe in mailers and sharp designs and all of those flyers and mailouts and stuff? Absolutely. I just think that you should always. It's a tool and something to be paired with you and your people getting out into the community. If you're not getting out into the community, like you said, then, and this will always be true, that, you said 80%. I guarantee that for any church, even that's just killing it on Facebook or marketing or just mail outs, that still 60 to 80% of your people are going to come because someone that they know or got a good impression of, maybe they just met, but they left a really good impression on them, that someone like that invited them. And so to answer your question, I think that it has to stay pushed from up top. I think that your pastor has to really be sold out on that this is the way we should do this. It's the most effective way. But also, I believe, and maybe this is not shared by everyone, that's okay. But I believe it's also the biblical model to get out there and just to invite people. And again, I'll use all of those tools. And I Facebook post for our church constantly. But I think some people use that as sort of a trade-off. Yeah. And you can never trade off just getting out there and meeting people in your community. Because I don't care how much money you spend. You could spend $2,000 on a Facebook ad. There's going to be households it doesn't reach. And then still, no matter how much money you spent, most people would scroll past it. No matter how much money you spent in a mailer, most people would discard it. Let's just be honest. Most people will discard your mailer. Which is why I just think you need to be intentional about it. If you're going to send out 20,000 or 2,000, that's great. But follow it up by going to that area. That way it's used as a tool, because you'll ask them, hey, did you get our mailer? And they'll say, yeah, probably, but they probably threw it away. But at least now you have an open door and you're showing that you're caring, because they get a lot of mailers from churches. Let's face it, or at least several in a year, especially when Easter's coming up or big times like that, because every church is trying to capitalize on Easter. So what stands you apart, and what will always stand you apart, is the times that you're out there and talking to them, if it's at the park or if it's on their front door or just meeting them in the neighborhood. That will always stand out, because that's a small playing field. There's not a lot of people on that field. There's a lot of churches on Facebook. There's a lot of churches with great websites, and you're just going to have a good website amongst a ton of good or great websites. But you getting out there and meeting the personal connection is obviously very, very huge. And look, when you're small, you don't really have a lot of word of mouth working for you yet. So one of the things that you need is just to be meeting people and creating, if you want a good reputation, create that own, reputation and just make it for yourself. And so I think it has to be pushed from the top, and I think it just has to be encouraged all the time. I think that soul winning and probably Bible reading are two of the quickest things that people can drop or get discouraged about. You can have a great day out talking to people and witnessing to people, and the next week not go, because it just takes so much momentum. So I think you just have to constantly be inviting and encouraging people to go with you and to come out. And if you have a class, just push it as a class, push it as a church, whatever, because it takes a lot of momentum in order to have a healthy and a strong outreach program.
That's actually part one. We have a part two of our interview with Jeremy. Now, whereas in part one here, we talked about, things like just excellence in media, and then really looking to what you can do to have a effective outreach for your big days and your community days, if you will. And it's excellent. And then as we continued to talk, we realized that we had enough content to break this up into two parts. So the next part, we kind of segue into talking more about after you get a guest, after someone's been at your church. That's great, but that's just the first step. How do you take that guest, that first-time visitor, and then you are able to actually convert them to a regular attender and as someone who's actually plugged in and involved in the core of your church? And I think they've got an excellent process with that. And that may seem a little bit out of, the creative space in terms of media and whatnot, but really it's a key part of marketing in general. If you think about a business, it's not just about contacting and getting the word out there to a potential customer. It's about making them a first-time customer, but then a repeat customer.
I think a lot of churches don't take the time and the effort and the money they don't spend a lot of time retaining people.
Yeah.
Once they get them in the church one time, they think, oh, the job is done. Well, no, that's great. Good job on getting that far, but that's what Jeremy does with taking that extra mile and saying, hey, we're going to do more instead of just that initial welcome. This is what we can do to bring them back.
Yep. And this is really how they have grown a church from, literally nothing in a storefront about 30 years ago to a church that on big days runs 600 and 700. And so, like I said, please subscribe to our podcast. And if you listen on iTunes or Apple Podcast, we'd love to get a review from you. Let us know what you think by giving us feedback in that way. And if you're feeling really generous, please share the podcast. Let us know. Share us with your likes and followers and people that you've connected with on social media. Share the podcast if you think this is going to be something that will help other people and help other church leaders with their church creative media and marketing. So Bo Snyder, thanks again for being with us.
Appreciate you, Luke. Good to be here.
It's been a good episode, and thanks again for joining us here on the Must Increase podcast, where our mission is to increase his name through your church.